NFVF has done really well over the past 10 years. In fact, you've received an unqualified report from the Auditor General. It's been 10 years in existence and has made quite a bit of headway. Could you put it into numbers for us?
Well, numbers, I'm not sure. But I think the NFVF, you know, firstly I have to say that this is our 11th unqualified audit report. So from the first day when we were established, we operated on a clean slate. But, you know, the good thing about the work that we do is that you can see it. You know, we don't have to go on a propaganda trip. You know, things that we do is things that you can see. The films that we see is films that you see on the screen. A number of documentaries that we have funded, you see it on the SABC, on other channels too. So we think that the NFVF has become one of the most stable state institutions in the country, and that's been acknowledged.
Well, it has been acknowledged, exactly, and basically you promote film, sure. And you promote film not only locally but internationally as well, and because of your great governance structures, you have been looked upon as one of the very successful government, sure. Institutions. What have you gotten right in terms of the way that you have managed the money that has come through, and of course the way that you've managed the operational values as well?
You see, we started on the basis that as much as we're accountable to South Africans on how we spend the money, I think what's very important is be accountable on the decisions that we take. For instance, how do we make decisions on which films to fund and which films not to fund, which programs to fund or not to fund. So the truth of the matter is that the NFVF has had from day one policies in place that governs the relationship between ourselves and the industry, but also internally, you know, the relationship between the executive management and the board has been, you know, governed by the policies and the systems that we have put in place. So this is one institution where you've never heard of a dispute between the CEO and the chairman, or between executive management and the board, because we respect the role of the board, which is an oversight one.
Well, Kobe, let's look at it from a governance perspective before we filter through into the numbers. I mean, it's great news that government department doing really well and really allocating its monies effectively.
Yeah, and I mean, it's such a vibrant industry. I mean, the film industry in this country, I think it certainly is an industry which can thrive if there's even more money that's been thrown at it, you know. Governance is obviously very, very important in places where there's grants that occur, and that there's a proper board of trustees together, or there's proper boards together, where there's proper structures in place where finances happen, and the way, you know, for instance, even if it's unqualified, you've got an audit opinion that, you know, that occurs on its books. You know, I think just to add some, you know, maybe just some element to the debate, I think that the film industry in this country has been the recipient of grants for quite a long period of time. You know, for 20 years, 20 years ago, I can remember people making films in this country and getting tax breaks if they could get funding, you know, from organizations. So certainly it's been a priority for government through time. The question is it a big enough priority? Shouldn't it be a larger priority? And I suppose that's a question that I have is, do you think this is a big enough priority for government, or do you think it should be a larger priority for government?
Well, it is big enough priority because of the impact that the film industry has on our economy, but also it has an impact on, you know, how South Africa reflects itself to the world and to itself, for instance. So yes, I think that it is a priority area. In fact, if it's looked at in relation to cultural industries, you know, I think I can simply say that the film industry is a less cost job creator. So you spend less money in creating more jobs, because the mistake people make with the film industry, they think that jobs are created in the creative space. In fact, jobs are created in the very low levels, you know, from drivers to set builders to electricians and so forth. You have to go into a film set to see an actual factory in motion. Sure. You count the number of trucks that are parked there. So then you begin to count the number of drivers. But also then you begin to look at the impact film has on transport, because in terms of the sector of the country classification, film is seen as part of transport, service, entertainment, and so forth and so forth. then you begin to look at the impact that film contribute or has on transport, for instance.
And of course, that's indirect annual turnover. We're sitting at around $3.5 billion to the country's GDP, and a direct annual turnover of more than 2.65 billion rand. So incredible numbers that we have seen coming through.
Absolutely.
And of course, when you look at what happened with Tsotsi in 2006, we received that Grammy. We know that other amazing films such as District 9, of course, also made quite a lot of headlines on a global level. You know, films such as Yesterday, and then you also had Blood Diamond, which was filmed in South Africa, and Lord of War. So South Africa not only becoming a great destination for international productions and local productions, but also starting to catch the eye of a lot of the creatives out there.
Yeah, and you know, for us, what is important is that you need to be able to come to South Africa with a script and live with a completed film. But also what's become more important, particularly when we talk co-productions, you know, because South Africa has put, besides the funding that we've put in place, we've signed co-production treaties with countries around the world that we can co-produce
Canada,
with.
Italy, Germany, and the UK, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and recently Australia and France. That gives us an opportunity, firstly, to access resources from those countries, but also it's in a market for our film, because once you have co-produced, then it guarantees you a market for that territory.
Let's look at production costs, Kobe, and I allude to the rand, because we've gained incredible ground against the US dollar and against a basket of major currencies. And I suppose what really made South Africa an attractive production destination is because the exchange rate differences. Now that we've got a much stronger rand, do you think it might have an impact on these producers saying, well, should we go to South Africa, or should we look at other, you know, countries that could perhaps offer us a better rate?
Well, I mean, I think firstly you've got the weather that plays in your favour here as well. I mean, so you've got all year round sunshine. So
you've been biased.
No, absolutely. But I'm a South African. Right? But I mean, again, so, you know, you're still making a film here 7 times cheaper potentially than what you could potentially make a film, for instance, in the US. Yes, sure, you got to get the equipment here, but then we have lots of equipment providers over here. Look at a company like Panavision, for instance. You could get those cameras serviced in this country. You know, there's full service for any of these things. I think a big question for me around this whole thing, though, is many emergent filmmakers are having to, if you look at an emergent filmmaker, the first place they go for money is venture capital. So they go to investors and they say, look, this feature film will cost, say, for instance, 10 million or 5 million or 8 million, whatever it is. And the majority of the funding then comes from venture capital. And it often is quite a very large process that they go through in order to get the financing going. What role does your organization play in facilitating that process? Or do you play a role?
That's a very important question, because I was going to say, besides the weather, the location and so forth, South Africa also contributes in terms of budget. You know, so when you come to South Africa, you're not just looking for all the things which are important, but the advantage South Africa has to many other countries that compete with us is that we have funding. So in South Africa, you can still find funding through the IDC, through ourselves, and some other funding mechanisms that's then add to the government rebate, which is managed by the DTI. So there's, besides everything else, there's an opportunity for sourcing finance from South Africa. But in terms of funding for film, you know, even private finance, venture capital is very dicey unless there's tax breaks, for instance, or there's rebates like we have with the DTI. The truth of the matter is that there are other models that could be utilized without having to tap into venture capital. You know, for instance, just if you come to produce in South Africa, if you have an agreement with a broadcaster, you know, that's called pre-sales. If you pre-sell to South Africa, you can pre-sell to Africa, you can pre-sell to Europe and America. That's one source of income. Then there's rebates, like we have, you know, in South Africa, you get 35% of the spend in South Africa. Something, you know, the only competitor is Australia because they provide you 40%. You know, so it's all those, how do you put together, when by the time you go to the IDC, you're looking for gap. You know? And if that gap finance is part debt, but plus equity, then it's even more favorable.
All right, what do you think the film industry is going to be worth in a few years' time? Do you think we're going to grow significantly?
Well, I think South Africa is growing. I think South Africa has become a partner of choice in terms of co-productions. I think South Africa has got a lot more to offer in terms of foreign productions coming to South Africa. Our skills base is comparable to the rest of the world. But of course, the rand, the exchange rate also adds to. So it's usually a package of what the country can offer. It cannot just be one element.